Hola, hola, y bienvenidos a Tu Salud, the definitive podcast for Latine and Indigenous health policy, where we talk about all things Latine, policy, and our health. I am Dr. Seciah Aquino, Executive Director of the Latino Coalition for a Healthy California. And today I am honored to be joined by my friend, Mr. Richard Tate, President and CEO of the California Wellness Foundation. Today, we'll be talking about intersectionality, transforming philanthropy as social welfare, the power of narrative change in culture, and the collective work of building communities where everyone has the power to thrive. So grab your cafecito, tune in, and join us for this heartfelt conversation. Y como siempre, a tu salud. Hola, hola, y bienvenido a Tu Salud, Richard. Thank you so much for joining us today. What an honor it is to have you here with us.
Thank you, Seciah. I'm so glad to be in conversation with you. Good way to end a day or wind down the day.
Definitely. Also, how is it summer? We're in July already.
I live for summer. I know the time flies, but this is one of my favorite times of year. Long days, warm nights. I'm here in Oakland. I live in the Bay Area. And warm nights can be a rarity. The fog comes in, it's a little cooler.
That's
But,
right.
every once in a while you get like one of those warm evenings and I love it. Plus, I'm a Gemini.
Lovely.
I'm a summer
Ah,
baby.
lovely. Oh, well, thank you so much for joining us. As you know, and our audience knows, our goal with the podcast and these conversations is really to have a heartfelt, heart to heart conversation. Just learn more about our amazing leaders leading health equity in California and setting the standard, setting a beautiful example for the rest of the country on what it can look like to actually work in partnership to actually advance this health justice work that we're all after.
Mm, mhm. That's the
Wonderful.
work. I'm in it. And I know you are too.
Love it. Love it. So, to get us started today, let's start with and about you. Who are you? Tell us about yourself, about your journey growing up.
Uh,
What shaped you to be who you are today?
mm. Well, I'll start at the beginning. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. So, though I run a California Health Foundation, I'm not from California. And I I actually had a pretty terrific childhood. Different in many ways than a lot of folks, but still really good. My father is Black, African American. My people on my father's side are from Mississippi. And my dad grew up in the country. Um,
Mhm.
and he and his family left Mississippi in the early 50s, fleeing racial violence. And he landed in St. Louis and had a pretty impoverished early childhood there after leaving Mississippi. But my dad is also incredibly smart. And he's a bit of a hustler. He's an entrepreneur, big ideas, a big thinker. And always a provider, not only in terms of material things, but in terms of hope, positivity, support. He's a remarkable guy. And in St. Louis, he met my mother. She has a
Mhm.
very different background. My mother is white. She's from rural Indiana, so she's also a
Mhm.
country girl. So they have that in common. But she grew up on a tomato farm, and her family um, was German immigrants who moved to the country in the 19th century and started farming there. And she went to St. Louis. She was the first in her family to go to college, and she landed there um, and was doing an internship. And she met my dad. So I come from a biracial family. My parents married in 71, which is not long after
Mhm.
Loving v. Virginia, the policy or the Supreme Court ruling that made interracial marriage legal. And they, because of their marriage, were pretty isolated. Their families were not immediately supportive of their marriage. So I grew up really with kind of a very small family. I didn't have a lot of aunts and
Mhm.
uncles. I didn't have grandparents around.
Yeah.
But my parents were incredibly supportive of me and my sisters and just raised us to think that we were entirely capable and could do whatever we put our minds to. We left St. Louis to come to Oklahoma. My dad had a job opportunity. And so I ended up going to high school in Oklahoma. And that was kind of a tough
Oh.
place to be um, a biracial gay kid. I wasn't out at the time.
Mhm.
And I remember that time in Oklahoma. I was a good student, motivated, very supportive family, but I could not wait to get out. And
Mm.
so, just like my parents kind of migrated in different parts of their life to find opportunities, I migrated to California to find my people. That's what brought me to California, LA to be exact.
Mhm.
I landed at the University of Southern California, which
Right
is,
on.
yes, fight on. We have that in common. Um, and I came to LA in 91, which was a pretty pivotal year. Uh, Rodney King verdict,
Mhm.
earthquake happened the next year. There's a lot going on in LA, and it was a very different experience. But I lived in LA for about 15 years, met my husband, fell in love,
Mhm.
the Bay Area, and I've been here ever since. So, my identity as a mixed race gay man who's lived in different parts of the country really has rooted me in both a sense of independence when it
Mhm.
comes to who I am, what I believe. I'm someone who's quite comfortable navigating between a number of different worlds and spaces. I feel like I lived a quote unquote intersectional life before I even knew what that
Mm.
word was.
Yeah.
And it really has kept me rooted in this belief that our basic humanity is what really connects us all, and that regardless of what we look like, who we love, where we're from, there are connections and opportunities for us to build community together.
Yeah, that's beautifully put. Thank you so much for sharing that, and what a beautiful background, and
It's
we're
who I
so
am.
lucky.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're so lucky to have you now in California and that you made that transition over.
Yeah, I couldn't wait to get out. I mean, when you're in an environment where no one looks like you, where
Yeah,
you feel like you have to hide parts of yourself
yeah,
in order to belong,
yeah.
it can be really challenging. And so, a bit of my journey has been about that idea of sort of finding community and a sense of belonging and a sense of identity and self.
Yeah.
And I've even brought that into my leadership in different ways when I think about organizations and
Mhm, mhm.
institutions, what they're about, not just the sort of what people expect of them, but who they are on the inside and what's trying to show up in the world, and what
Yeah,
it means to commit yourself.
yeah.
Um, and I think my personal experience navigating my own identity and background has informed my leadership in many ways.
That's beautiful. We talk to our students and our youth about stepping into their power
Uh,
and really owning who they are. What is your take on that secret sauce? What helps us walk into that owning our power sense of self?
I think part of it is being willing to reflect,
Mm,
explore, and to find people who are willing to take the time to see and support us.
mhm,
I was fortunate to have parents who were incredibly supportive, but I was also really fortunate in my childhood and particularly in my teenage years, that time in Oklahoma, to
mhm.
find some adults who really did see and support me
Yeah.
in developing my own sense of purpose and identity. I've always been a communicator. And that's been kind of a through line from my childhood to my career. In my earliest days, that really manifested in
Mm.
my interest in reading and in theater and performance. And so, in high school,
Oh,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
were
In high
you a
school,
theater kid?
I was a theater kid. I
I
was a
love
theater.
that.
Yeah, and there were a couple of, folks that I met, when I was performing in Oklahoma doing community theater, in a park outside the library in the town where I lived in Oklahoma. There was a drama teacher and her husband, who ran a little small community theater, and they were
Mm.
incredibly supportive of me. And they
Mhm.
cast me in plays and productions. I played Prince Charming in a production. They, despite my feeling at that time like I was different, that there weren't a lot of
Mm.
people that looked like me who had families like mine, they really supported me in both being
Mm.
who I was, but
Yeah,
also giving me a platform and an opportunity. And
yeah,
so, as young people, finding those folks who support us, even if it's not our parents,
yeah.
I think is incredibly important. And the journey to kind of living and owning our power is a lifelong journey.
It is. It is.
And you know, kids, it keeps getting better. That's what I would want folks to know. I mean, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, I'm in my 50s now, and sometimes I feel like I'm really just settling into my power. And
Yeah,
the question becomes, what do you want to use? What do you want to do with that power?
yeah, yeah. How do we leverage that privilege that we have and the platforms that we've been, gifted with to do some
Yeah.
good with it?
Yeah. And the gift is the operative word because it's both a gift to have a sense of your own power and to be able to operate from that place, but it's also about, for me, what do you want to give back to the
Yeah.
world? I have had awareness of my own privilege relative to others, despite some challenges. Very stable family, good education, an opportunity to do lots of things. And I got to a point in my career where
Mhm,
I thought, what am I able with from this place where all these gifts that I've explored in myself and that I've been
mhm.
provided through experience, how can I return that to the communities that I care about in the work that I do? And that's really informed some key pivots for me in my
Yeah,
life.
well, that's beautiful. On those pivots and that professional journey and, looping in what formed you as a human being and being able to practice that in your career, tell us a little bit more about that. How did you begin to navigate this career journey to be where you're at today?
Yeah. Well, I didn't start my career in philanthropy. In fact, I didn't know a lot about philanthropy at all until I was well into my working life. I actually started my career after USC. Well, was a theater kid. I went
Uh-huh.
to the theater school at USC, but I changed majors and I ended up with a degree in English and creative writing. So,
Ah,
again, words, communication, language, always just a part of what I was interested in and passionate about.
yeah.
And I had an opportunity to work at the university immediately after I graduated. So I actually worked in the admissions office. And what I loved about that work was that to me, it was about helping young people, families navigate what had been a really big transition for me. I
Mm.
didn't know a lot
Mhm,
about college and universities. My mom was the first in her family to go to college. It was just very new. And being able to, again, sort of use benefit of my experience, my privilege to help others navigate that was really exciting to me. Plus, I got to do admissions presentations at college night.
yeah.
Former in me was satisfied, but it was really about that kind of support. And I loved working on a campus, but I quickly realized that I wasn't doing, and I hadn't yet really explored what
Mhm,
my gifts, the things that I cared about, could really
mhm,
do in the world.
mhm.
I felt like I hadn't left home in some ways because I was still in
Mm.
university,
Yep,
and
yep,
so
yep.
that set me on a journey. I never had a career path or a plan. The through line was always communications and language, and my
Yeah.
first exploration led me to magazine publishing. I got
Uh-huh.
very interested in journalism and writing, and
Yeah.
I worked in magazine publishing in LA. I worked for a time for The Advocate magazine, which is
Ooh.
a gay and lesbian news magazine. It
Hmm.
was also really formative for me because I was able to do work that allowed me to show up and be my full self.
Yeah.
And uh, an experience like that really rooted me in the belief that if I was willing to
Mm.
demand it of the world, I could find the places where I didn't have to compromise and I could be
Yeah.
myself. And I've been fortunate to find jobs and working experiences where that's been the case. But
Yeah.
after magazine publishing, I worked briefly in technology,
Mhm,
first
mhm.
dot-com boom, doing some writing and editing. And at that time, I met my husband and moved to the Bay Area and
Oh.
made a bit of a career pivot. Again, didn't really have a big plan, but was thinking about, okay, I've been a writer. What could I do next? And I had a former editor who was working at a biotechnology company.
Mhm, mhm.
I was always kind of a secret science geek. If I didn't go into theater, I would have been a biology major, maybe a doctor. And so I decided to sort of pursue an opportunity that was presented to me to interview for a job in biotechnology. And I spent many years working in corporate communications and investor relations. Again, communications,
Yeah,
writing,
yeah.
then feeding kind of my interest in
Mm,
science and health. But I quickly got burned out in the corporate
mhm.
environment.
Yeah.
The competition, an interesting example of wealth and sort of doing good, but doing good for profit. Um,
Yeah,
developing drugs that I think made meaningful impact in people's lives, but
yeah.
that were priced in ways that were inaccessible to many people. And being on the corporate side, I got to see that firsthand. So I was really looking for a pivot, and that's when I found my way to philanthropy. I was in my mid 30s at that,
Mhm.
and I just had a friend who began working with the Omidyars, the founder of eBay, and his wife,
Mhm.
and there was an opportunity to interview for a position, a communications position, with a project that they were running called Hope Lab. It actually still exists today, and it was different. It was an operating foundation, so we were running programs, and it was a technology design program
Ooh.
about how video games, in particular, could impact the behavior of young cancer patients in sticking to their
Oh.
medications. And so
Mhm.
it was a really interesting project, and they did some clinical trials research, which connected to some of the work that I did at the biotechnology company. And as a communicator, I just thought this is an amazing story. This organization, not to make a profit, but to improve the lives of cancer patients, is designing this video game that is going to help them fight their
Wow.
cancer and win.
It's very creative.
Very creative, and very interesting, and that's what drew me in, and then I started to learn about philanthropy. Okay, what does it mean? How is it that this organization is able to design this game? Who's funding
Yeah.
this? And working with, Pam Omidyar, and her husband Pierre, just an extraordinary opportunity to see how creative, innovative thinking and philanthropy, what that could look like. And I spent about 10 years working with Hope Lab as part of the Omidyar group and got to a point in my leadership where I really felt like the exciting sort of leading edge technology work was really interesting. And I felt like, as a biracial gay man, as someone
Mhm.
who achieved a certain level of success, I wanted to begin to think about the communities that I felt most connected to
Yeah.
and wanted a new opportunity to, again, sort of take the next step in my leadership. I felt like I had more to offer in terms of helping to shape an organization that gave
Mm.
people kinds of experiences that I'd had
Yeah.
as a young professional growing up. And that's when I found my way to the California Wellness Foundation. And communications role, working, well, quick story. I went to a conference, an event in San Diego, the Communications Network convening, and Judy Belk, my predecessor at
Yeah.
yes, Judy, amazing, was on stage at the Communications Network event talking about the value of strategic communications,
Mm.
and she herself had a background in communications, and
Yeah.
what stood out to me was, here's a woman running $1 billion philanthropy, a Black woman, talking about the power of communications. And so for me, again, at a point in my life where I was thinking about how do I connect who I am, how I identify what I care about in the space of philanthropy, how do my skills translate? Here's a communications professional turned CEO, woman of color leading a $1 billion foundation. I was like, I need to go work for her.
Oh,
And
that's
that's what I did. I was fortunate enough that she saw a spark in me. And the thing that was most exciting to me, Seciah, was, as we start to talk about kind of the focus of this work that we do every day in health and racial justice work, um, The California Wellness Foundation was a pretty traditional grant making organization.
Mhm,
We had
mhm,
this vision that we could be a social change philanthropy, that what
mhm,
we needed to do was shift our mindset and our
mhm.
to think about how we activated all of the institutional resources to drive that mission. And for me, as a communicator, her idea that we should be doing as a foundation public affairs work, that
Yeah.
grant making was not enough to move mission and to be deep partners with the folks we were funding. We needed to have communications capacity of our own. We have a voice as an institution. We need to use our relationships, build relationships with government partners, with business leaders. And so I joined the foundation as the VP of Public Affairs and built out
Mm,
an integrated team focused on communications and policy advocacy from the foundation perspective, and really pushing the envelope as a private foundation. There are rules about how we operate and what we communicate around, particularly in terms of lobbying, but there's still a lot of room for us to lift our voice and to talk about the issues and why they matter to the people that we fund. So I was a little nervous about leaving a part of philanthropy that was really innovative and doing amazing things, working with the Omidyars, to something that was more traditional. But
mm.
that vision of not just grant making, but being a social change
It's
philanthropy.
transformational to have that vision and be able to
Yes.
execute.
Yes. So that's what drew me to Cal Wellness. And I've been here for about 10 years. I stepped into the CEO seat 3 years ago. And I'm really excited about where we're heading. Just building on that legacy and my own experience here at the foundation of being deeply connected to community and the work that we do, but also thinking boldly and differently about what philanthropy can be and how we show up in the world and in the work that we do.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really sitting with something that you shared about the power of communications. And I'm
Mm,
I'm sitting with the power that words can have on ourselves, on others, even the way we speak to ourselves on a day-to-day basis matters and how we feel and how we present to the world. Talk to me more about seeing this in action, being able to be Prince Charming on the stage, right? And being able to then communicate to groups now in your CEO role about the need to transform the narrative to
mm.
one where we are leading on health justice. And we know that a lot of that work is changing hearts and changing minds so that we can advance justice together.
Communications is such a powerful tool, and it's the kind of thing that we do, people and organizations every day, even if you're not doing it intentionally.
Yeah.
You're communicating something. And to
Yeah.
me, communications is really about how do you move ideas and people?
Mm-hmm.
How do you move ideas forward? How do you engage people around an idea in order to take action? And that has sort of been the arc of how my own understanding and use of communications has evolved from
Mm-hmm.
performing to leading and engaging teams and people to talking to audiences, communities, even in private one-on-one settings. All of those are opportunities to communicate, to share ideas, um, and to move people. There's a part of communications that for me, at this point in my life is also about receiving, listening, and communications as an act of not only pushing out, moving things out, but also receiving. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's so much power in communications, both for individuals and institutions. I think the
Yeah.
way into that work for any of us who is in a position where communications is central, and I think it's particularly true of leaders, know your story.
Mm-hmm.
Really do need to know your own story. And for me, that may be more complicated than it is for
Mm-hmm.
others. Although I would argue we all hold multiple identities. We all, we show up in different ways, whether it's our family background, where our people come
Mm-hmm.
from, to our family relationships, the things that we
Yeah.
like, that we enjoy, who we love. We all hold multiple identities, but knowing your story really grounds you in how you then present yourself to the world, how you engage, and how you understand how you're receiving information and ideas, what biases may come to play for you. But that is deep work. And I think it's worth any of us who wants to lead or is leading. We really do need to understand that. And it's true of our institutions too. There are a lot of organizations, particularly philanthropies, whether the money comes from
Mm.
um, families or from businesses or corporations. Over the last 10, 15, 20 years, a lot of work has been done in the sector about knowing where your money comes from, owning your story. Um, some foundations, I think, appropriately have kind of positioned themselves to really repair the harm or the damage that may have been afflicted on different communities. Because of the businesses or corporate practices that the money comes from. And so, again, owning your story in that regard, I think is really important and powerful so that you can, with credibility and with confidence, engage with people, engage with communities, not hiding, not shying away from being your whole self
Yes.
in the way that you engage. So that's a little bit of my own kind of thinking about how communications informs who I am, how I think about my work.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. With the Health for All movement, a
Mm,
lot of the work that went into those first few years was just achieving some sort of narrative change around how we saw folks who were undocumented. And I think we achieved a ton by being able to completely change the hearts and policies that would actually ensure care for our most vulnerable, who tend to be the undocumented community in California, and look at everything that we were able to achieve. Now,
mm,
that being said, in the current context that we're in, us at LCHC, we've been discussing how dangerous the current narrative has been in taking away from all those achievements that we were able to do collectively. And part of that is this, newborn narrative again around resource allocation, a lot of blame around the cost on the most poor and undocumented, and being, quick to make decisions that puts the most vulnerable, at the table to balance our budget on
mhm.
their backs. And that is a concerning shift. Tell me from your perspective, how do we continue to push back on that, especially on the verge of this new governor coming in, right? I feel this energy. We have such an opportunity before us. What do we need to do to continue that momentum moving us forward versus taking us back?
Yeah. Well, you just said it. It's about momentum moving forward. What is the vision or the idea that we want to anchor ourselves in for what's possible, what we're building toward, not just what we're fighting against. And so I completely agree with you. Language matters, and even your own story around health for all. And I think the way that many of us who are doing health focused work, justice work, are appreciating that narrative and culture really do drive behavior. I mean, we've kind of known that, and even in the clinical
Yeah.
context, in terms of
Yeah.
how to support health, behavioral health, but
Hmm.
also when you think about shifting policies and practices that impact people's health, a lot of that is about helping people understand the ideas and the story that really are driving those things. So the focused on narrative is so important. I think right now, this idea of what are we building toward is so critically important as we think about a transition in leadership here in California. And as we begin to, we've just experienced an extraordinary period of dismantling and disruption of a lot of the institutions and the supports that have really represented progress in expanding access into raising opportunities for all people to receive the care that they need. The Affordable Care Act,
Hmm.
all of the work around civil rights, that advanced not only opportunities for Black people and Americans, but people with disabilities, that
Yep.
became the foundation of things like um, Medicaid and Medicare. I mean, these kinds of big shifts were signs of progress that have been disrupted. And it's very easy to want to be in a position where we're fighting against all of the things. But what we miss is the opportunity to paint a picture for what's possible and to take that longer perspective of how, as folks often say, the path of progress is not linear. So that
Mhm.
longer arc tells us that we may be in a moment where the headwinds are strong, but we're moving towards something that is possible. That's what Health for All was about. That dream doesn't need to die. In fact, there are many of us who are doing some work right now as we look at this transition, some work around the future of Medi-Cal, a
Yes.
condition that Cal Wellness and others have funded to really put down our thinking about how we not simply accept that we
Mhm.
need to pull back on all the progress that we've made around health policy in California. We just need to paint a new picture of what's possible. And
Yeah.
that's communications. But again, communications is about moving ideas and ultimately moving people. And so I think that's the opportunity for us. And the more that we have this awareness that we need that shared narrative, that shared
Yeah.
vision, and the more that folks are willing to come together and collaborate on that, so it's not one institution,
Mhm.
foundation painting a picture about what they think is possible, or one nonprofit organization fundraising around a big idea, but those of us who are willing to sort of say, you know what, now is the time for us to have a bigger vision and then think about what we're bringing to the table to advance that bigger vision. That's what I see as the opportunity for us right now.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I love that you mentioned action, right? It's not just about touching hearts, but how do we move people towards action? And I feel like in this fight and in our groups, it's very easy to, speak to those of us who already believe this. Let's talk about how important it is to reach folks who might be on the other side of the aisle, or who might
Right.
not see themselves as part of the narrative, as part of the conversation, because perhaps they're not dealing with some of the issues. How do we connect those dots for folks?
Well, I do think a story matters and really acknowledging, as I sort of started, that kind of sense of what is the shared humanity and the shared experience that
Yes,
we do
yes,
have that really connects us. And I think we're in a moment where, in the last, I would say, 10 years, we've been confronted with, I think, some ugly, hard realities around particularly race in America and racism, the progress that we thought that we'd made, and the reality of how deeply rooted some of the racist policies and attitudes are in the country. We're experiencing this moment where that backlash
yeah.
against a lot of progress is playing itself out in many ways. And it's sort of transmuted and morphed into attacks on immigrant communities. I mean, this is a playbook and sort of an approach that is deeply rooted in some of the racist history of our country. And I do think that um, one of the things that we need to do to connect with people who may not connect with or understand the racial justice issue are some of the more fundamental things about who belongs,
Yeah,
who has access to opportunity. I think many Californians, Americans,
yeah.
people around the world connect to this idea that what we want is opportunity for our families, for our loved ones, our communities. And when we encounter barriers that prevent us from protecting ourselves, our loved ones, that's where people start
Mhm,
to get angry and frustrated and upset. And rather than turn on one another, I think our ability to think about, well, what is really getting in the way? And
mhm,
for me, the work that I've done at Cal Wellness in particular has really pushed me to think about what
mhm.
fundamentally those things are.
Yep.
So, a piece of work that we've done in the last year is to really think about, okay, what does it mean to be a health philanthropy in 21st century in California? What are the drivers and the barriers to health and wellness? And Seciah, when you really break it down,
Mhm.
health doesn't just happen in hospitals. It's not just about clinical care. there are deeper issues, social problems that really drive health and wellness. And there's a lot of academic research around that. But it's most basic and what people, anyone can understand, your tia, your uncle, your auntie, race, money, and power.
Raise money and
Race, money,
power.
and power are often the things that get in the way. And if you don't necessarily identify with issues around racial justice, I think all of us understand how money,
Yep.
particularly given the growing income inequality, the lack of opportunities to make a living wage as costs increase, the lack of respect and dignity for workers in certain parts of the country and certain segments of society. These are the things that, I think are frustrating. And I think start to when you talk to people about what really is impacting their ability to achieve health and wellness, these are the things that we connect on. And power, people feeling like they actually have some control and influence over the decisions that are governing their lives, that awareness of what this country promises
Yeah.
its people, residents here having a voice in the decisions that govern their lives and activating folks to be engaged in the process.
Mm,
And again, whether you want to think about it as reaching across the aisles or just supporting our basic humanity and our, biological imperative to community, it's sort of this call to sort of say what connects us. And we all want voice and a sense of power and control in our lives. We all want opportunity. And in our society, that often means economic opportunity. How do we support ourselves and our families? And for many of us, the issues around race and who belongs are very real, painful and real right now. But those are some basic things when I think about how we communicate across the aisles. I think folks who are willing to have frank conversations around what's getting in the way, those are three things that I really see as critical, even if they're uncomfortable, Cecia,
yeah.
because I will say
Yeah.
people do get uncomfortable. And hey, let's be real, there's been a lot of pressure, particularly around race, to not talk about race.
Right.
There's a lot of divisiveness right now around money. And, do we love billionaires for the way that they model what's possible and how successful one can be in our society? Or are billionaires exerting undue influence and actually manipulating outcomes to support their health and wellness? I mean, these are the kind of dialogues around money that feel scary, but they're important. They're important. And they're nuanced in many ways, but if we're not talking about them at all, we're not making progress on the problem.
I couldn't agree more. And I really appreciated you sharing the shared humanity piece because I think if we really think to ourselves as we have those uncomfortable, brave conversations, right? Part of making that connection is at the end of the day, the barriers that we're fighting against are poverty cycles that our communities are in, right? So, what happens if instead of fighting each other, we fight the root cause, which
Yes.
is poverty? And then how much more can we do when we do that together?
Yes. Yeah. I think that's right. And, in many ways, these are not new problems. I mean, this is the challenge of humanity as we organize ourselves in different configurations of civilizations and societies. There's an element of this, but I do think that we're at a moment of real reckoning. What do we value? What do we prioritize? What are the things that really connect us
Yeah.
um, and connect all of us, not just a few of us who have a particular set of objectives, but
Yeah.
the vast majority of us, these more fundamental questions about the human experience and how do we organize around that? Not just to, in the construct of kind of philanthropy and nonprofit work, not just to treat the symptoms of the problems, but to really think about what are these deeper issues that we continue to struggle with. And, in some ways, I imagine you feel this. It's not that you or I are going to see these problems solved in our lifetime. They may never be solved in the history of our species, but we can and should be pushing for progress and exploring what that looks like. And that's why I think, again, I've always been curious about what we're building toward. What are the new ways that we could be approaching this?
Yeah.
Something may have gotten us to a certain level of progress and now it's not working. And I think that that's part of what we experienced in the last couple of years. It's like, okay, the whole context has changed. The what got us to this point isn't what's going to get us to the next level of success and progress. So, what do we do? How do we understand ourselves, our relationship to the world and others in a new way that helps us push forward to make progress again? And some of that's going to mean retooling how we operate, how we think about ourselves, our organizations. Um, but that can be exciting and enlivening work as well,
Yeah.
even if it feels scary.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. And, on this reimagining conversation, something that we're trying to do at LCHC is center community voices, right? And so in this past year, we brought to the table over 15 partners across California, Latina and Indigenous led and serving organizations to put together an agenda, a
Mhm.
a health equity master plan, right? We have California loves our master plans,
Yep.
but we have always said we need a health equity master plan. And the beauty of it is that the policies that we're putting on the table, we're creating this policy blueprint so that our legislators, our new governor, we did their homework, right? And all they have to do is execute on these policies and they're being informed by that community wisdom. But the beauty is that it impacts everybody, right? If one community is doing well, then it impacts and benefits all of California to be able to be supported.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's that idea that our success can often be measured by
Mm,
not folks who are at the edge of something, but by how are we bringing everyone along? And so your point around, whether you want to call it equity or you want to call it sort of, building cohesive communities where everyone can thrive, it's really about paying attention to um, folks who have the least, who have had less opportunity and being sure that we're kind of moving forward together, that kind of collective
yeah,
mentality versus the sort of individual success and achievement. But Cecilia, you said something I actually want to ask you about communications
please.
because you talk about sort of like the listening that you're doing and even this work to kind of think about a master plan and
Mhm.
synthesize a lot of ideas and aspirations that people have. How do you think about communications in your work? Not
Yeah,
only the sort of sharing and moving of ideas, but the listening part. But what have
yeah,
you learned?
yeah. The listening part is so important. And I think when we talk about communications as a concept, many times we imagine it externally, right? What is being said externally. But the listening part is actually key to communicating well. You have to know who you're speaking to, you have to know what their priorities are, and you have to be willing and humble enough, right, to be able to take the folks that you're speaking to, their priorities, and be able to, in a very impactful way, even transform the way that you do the work.
Uh-huh.
I'll give you an example. About 2 or 3 years ago, we started working closely with our partners at Cielo. And Odilia, who is a CEO there, powerful, amazing, powerful individual. She brought to our attention actually during a panel at one of our summits that the movement of Latinidad is actually hurtful to indigenous communities because it blankets over a whole experience and life that is well beyond the boundaries that we put on Latinidad and Latinidad as a movement. And so we heard that and we said we need to do things better. We need to do the work, we need to be better partners. And so we centered them in the work, and the next year we ran a bill together to be able to bring California to a new level of data disaggregation so that we would be able to understand the health disparities
Uh-huh.
experienced what for different communities within Latino and indigenous communities. And we were successful in that. We were able to celebrate that together. But it really shows, right? When you're willing to listen and you're willing to take those courageous steps forward, you can accomplish so much together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it makes the message and the communication that you do then move out more powerful and resonant with more people who really understand and see themselves in what it is that you're trying to advance.
Yeah.
I have a related question because, it's on my mind. I think a lot about the idea of bridging identities and people. You asked this question about how you bridge across the aisles. And for those of us who continue to push forward with racial equity and racial justice work, the question around multiracial organizing and really embracing this belief that when we focus and support specific communities, it really is for the benefit of all of us.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how you think about that sort of cross-racial organizing and support. And what sparked it for me is just, frankly, your own sort of reflection within what you thought you understood as community. And it's sort of this, oh, wait, there's more here, there's more depth here. And even internally having to do some reflection if you think about, your own community. But then that next level is about, okay, how do we hold our people
Yeah.
in the center, but also do that work to bridge.
Great question, Richard. I appreciate that. You know, from a public health perspective, we are all interconnected,
Mhm.
and my health impacts your health and vice versa. And so when we're able to look beyond ourselves and be able to look at our neighbors and say, how can we help each other advance, be
Uh-huh.
better, have those opportunities to help our families? We're able to accomplish so much together. And we actually have a beautiful case study. We've done it as the US, we've actually done it. And we saw it during COVID-19. And it was when we actually expanded access to the safety net.
Uh,
We saw, across the different safety net programs, be it food stamps, we saw an increase to the amount that families were receiving. We saw housing vouchers. We saw the Medicaid flexibilities, being able to stay on without having to, renew access to it. When we were helping families have a stronger access to the safety net, we actually lifted 12 million people out of
mhm.
poverty across the US. And that is the power of public health and the social determinants of health. And it's also an economic investment, and I think in that desire to work together with other folks who might not connect the dots just because it's a heartfelt, passionate issue, the economy connects us, right? California boasts about being the fourth largest economy in the world. Well, if we want to stay there, we need to ensure that our populations are healthy. And the economic theory of human capital tells us if our communities are healthy, then those communities will show up to work, will show up to school, and will be active, civically engaged folks. And so across every piece of the puzzle in how we do the work, we are always going to be stronger if we're centering and supporting each other's battles. And those intersectional identities, right? We all struggle a bit differently. We all face different barriers. But at the end of the day, especially in positions of power and privilege, being able to bring other people to the table, notice who is around you and who isn't, right? And being able to say, actually, my friend here needs a seat at the table too. Being able to use your formal position of power to break down barriers. And you
Uh-huh.
and I talked about this, right?
Yep.
There be Trojan horses in these spaces that weren't created by us or for us. How do we break them down from the inside?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And part of that for me starts with like what are we doing in our own organizations? Both as you described the intentional listening that you do outside of your four walls and the screen time you spend with your staff to how you're really listening and engaging with others. Not only folks who you know are aligned and doing the work that you're doing, but being willing to hear those signals like you described in your story, like, oh, wait, there's something that we didn't fully understand. We need to go there and
Uh-huh.
understand what that's about. But also how we think about who sits in the seats in our institutions,
Yeah.
on our staff, at the executive level, on our boards.
Yeah.
That's one of the things, I described my journey to Cal Wellness, seeing Judy as one of the few Black women running, $1 billion foundation. But also when I looked at the website during my job search process and saw this amazingly diverse board and staff, and not only in terms of race and ethnicity, but also a board that reflected folks who were grant partners, who are in the work, doing community work, who were sitting in governance roles, making decisions about the strategy and the direction of the institution. And so your point around sort of how we bring people in, how we set the table, that's part of what I meant about thinking about what we're building toward. If what this moment calls for is new ways of working and thinking, part of that starts with what we're willing to change about ourselves and our institutions. And I think that there's some really exciting work to be done beyond grant making. If you're a foundation, how you think about coalition work, if you're in a community based organization, how you even kind of shift beyond what the coalition was to what it needs to be in the future. And foundations themselves thinking about how do we organize? How do we get out of these issue silos to think about these deeper barriers? If you're working in education, I am confident that race, money, and power show up in how you are able to advance opportunities for children in education. And so thinking about what these deeper issues are and how we begin to support work that really is unwinding those challenges. It's the moment that we're in, doing this deep sort of identity based work in different ways, personally, institutionally, and then being willing to name the things and start working to build better.
Yeah. It's the moment that we're in. That is 100% right. And if I can just say thank you to you all at Cal Wellness, I really appreciate the way you all lead with such intentionality. And it's so clear to us as partners, even in the way you adapt your requirements around grant reports, right? It's something as simple as a grant report went a long way, especially during the pandemic. And then we were faced with the fear pandemic and the ICE raids, and we were, on full defense mode. And to be able to have that flexibility, we felt seen, we felt supported, and we felt like true partners with you all. So thank you for doing that.
Well, it's the job, it's the work, I believe, and part of it, what you're naming is just again some deep internal reflection about what are we doing and how we operate. There's so much of the dynamic between nonprofits and foundations that is inherited from systems and ways of thinking about money that don't serve
Yeah.
us, our communities, that are rooted in banking and legal practice that aren't about supporting, uh, for us, health and wellness in communities. And a lot of those practices just get in the way of work actually moving. And so I appreciate the um, experience that you've had of those kinds of shifts in practice because we need to be doing more of that. We're pushing ourselves to think differently about that, and I know many others are. And I think the foundation sector needs to be thinking more broadly about how we change our practices and how
Yeah.
we reset our tables, even
Yeah.
who sits on our boards and in our organizations.
Yeah. You all are beautifully diverse. I really appreciate that. And actually, on that agenda setting, I don't know if you're ready to reveal but maybe you can tell us a little bit about the process as you all have been doing your strategic planning. I would
Yeah,
love to hear a little bit more.
yeah. Well, It's funny, I think for a long time, people were reluctant to say they were doing strategic planning
Mm,
because, when foundations do strategic planning, that has often not meant good things for grant partners and community. But I think in some ways it's made a lot of sense in the last couple of years that people are saying, again, what are we doing? What
yeah.
was working? What wasn't? And we just need to go back and retool ourselves in the way that we approach the work. Um, and for us, let's do that, but let's not step back from the work. We can do two things at once. We can do what we know, which is, we're a grant making organization. Let's get money out to communities. And we've done that. And in parallel, um, we've been doing this reflection about what is the next generation of work at the foundation. So for us, it started with a lot of listening. We went through a period at the end of our previous strategy, thinking about what we learned, what worked,
Mhm.
talking to grant partners, looking at data. But the thing that really stood out, Cecia, was the period of time, that 10 years under the previous strategy, was a similarly disruptive period of progress and regression. So we had the passage of the Affordable Care Act that kind of was at the front end of that strategy. And then we had the 2016 election, and we had COVID, and there were all these things that we had to navigate. And so we came out of that period recognizing that being adaptable and
Yeah.
being responsive, that
Mm,
as an institution, we certainly need to hold long term goals around building toward health and wellness, but we also need to be thinking about how we adapt and respond to immediate needs and how we continue to refine and revise our practices to meet the moment. So, one of the things that happened out of COVID was just accelerating the way that we move dollars. So, if 20 years ago, doing grants on a quarterly cycle was good enough. Not anymore. The speed in which we operate, the ways in which we rethink our approaches and processes are incredibly important. So we got to the end of that and thought, okay, so adaptability, responsiveness, this commitment to a broad interpretation of health and wellness, but also an acknowledgement that we had become pretty diffuse in the way that we were thinking about the work. So in the last year and a half, we did some work with a more focused group of folks at the foundation, and the board actually set up a committee that was equal representation of not just the board, but staff as
mhm.
people who were responsible for executing the work day to day, and community partners, grant partners who were actually out doing work. And that committee of 9 people that I sat on and chaired really helped us develop a new framework, a new way of thinking about our philanthropy over the next generation. And
Mhm.
what emerged from that was this naming of really what's getting in the way, race, money, and power, and what we envisioned as sort of the next period of work, which we're calling building the power to be well.
Ooh.
And building the power to be well is both about naming what gets in the way, but also it's about building toward what's possible.
Mhm.
For
Mhm.
us, I'll tell you, we'll be announcing in the fall, we're sharing in the fall. This isn't like, it won't be trumpets and, banners, but it will
We'll
be.
be cheering for you.
Oh, thank you. It is, for me, it's about transparency and just wanting people to know what it is that we're committing ourselves to and how we'll be moving in this next phase. And so what we'll be sharing is that this building the power to be well framework of race, money, and power will really be focused in healthcare.
Mhm.
What we're thinking of right now, the language that we've used is inclusive healthcare, and continuing to push this work around how we expand the way we think about healthcare, what's covered and supported both by our healthcare system, but also what kind of practices around health and wellness that other communities may be deeply rooted in, but aren't necessarily seen by more traditional and the current health system. And this is a place where California has made incredible progress.
Yeah.
And then we're thinking a lot about economy and the environment. So our conversation today about money and part of our framework. Um, when we look at California and some of the things that are driving not only economic challenges, but also environmental challenges, whether that's in the Central Valley or environmental disasters like we saw in Boyle Heights in LA, a lot of these are connected to business practices, uh, corporate greed, frankly, or people just not having opportunities to participate in in the economy in the way to protect people and the planet. And so that's will be a focus of our work. A big piece of that is thinking about ownership, employee ownership, how we think about who controls those businesses and those companies, those economic engines that are making decisions around issues that ultimately impact the environment. And then the last piece, Cecia, which is probably the one that really supports all of this work, is how we continue to build community power and agency and voice. How are people participating in our democracy, and how are their voices being heard? And how are we organizing in communities across the state to ensure that people are able to participate in government, not only through who's elected, but the decisions and the policies that get made? And that's, organizing work, but it's also health work. It's
Yes.
about supporting people in engaging and then ultimately influencing the systems and the policies that govern their lives. So there's a lot there, but I'm excited in part because the framework is not only about kind of where we're focusing, but it is about how we're operating. We've committed all of our resources as a foundation. So this is not just a grant making strategy. We
Yeah.
have moved beyond being a grant making institution. We still do that. This idea of a social change philanthropy means all of the resources that we have, our grant dollars, our endowment, the $1 billion that we put in the capital markets. What's that doing in the world? What are the companies that we're invested in? What could we be investing in to accelerate some of the mission related work that we're doing? And
Yeah.
100% of our endowment is aimed at that target,
Wow.
including who holds the dollars. The diversity of the financial markets is not good. It doesn't reflect many of the communities. And it's a problem when we think about economic equity and opportunity. And so, even that $1 billion being put into the hands of people who reflect the California communities, so racial diversity, a background of experience, pushing ourselves in that regard. And then, as we've talked a lot about, voice and influence. As an
Mhm.
institution, we have a platform. We can be a civic leader. We don't need it's the time has passed where we sit behind
Mhm.
our desks and write checks.
Mhm.
That's not enough for us to make progress on our mission. And so using all those resources is part of building the power to be well. And the last piece I'll say, Cecia, we talked about it as well, is partnership. Um, I'm just very clear that one institution isn't going to change the world. And the way that we achieve success and progress is through collective action. That's true for individuals and communities, neighborhoods, but it's also true of foundations and philanthropy. What can we be doing together? And how can we be working differently with our partners? Not the transaction of check writing, but bringing our ideas, our access to different opportunities to the table and saying, what can we build together, both with peers and with folks who are practitioners in the work. So there's a lot moving at Cal Wellness, and I look forward to sharing more. But I've
Yeah.
given you a little bit, and
Love
the
it. We got a little sneak peek.
audience. Yes, yes, yes.
Aw, well, congratulations. That sounds so exciting. And if I can be completely honest and transparent, we're so excited for you all. And you really are setting the stage for the rest of philanthropy. And not just in California, but across the US. And that is something to be admired and celebrated because these type of powerful changes and moves is what moves systems into a new norm, a new reality.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have one of the things about being on stage in Oklahoma, just to bring it back, a call back to the
Love
start of
it.
our conversation. And even standing in front of people today in my job as CEO at Cal Wellness, when I'm willing to sort of be myself and people see what's possible. I've had experiences where, um, you know, uh, young queer folks, young people of color, young biracial people sort of say, oh, look at that CEO who's talking about who he is and why he cares about this work. In the same way, I think about what we're doing at Cal Wellness as a philanthropy. It's not about, it's not a competitive mode of operation, which I think sometimes when we're in our silos and just thinking
Mhm.
about, what are we doing against our own goals and objectives? It's back to that thing about who are we and what are we trying to do? Let's stay rooted in that. And then let's not be afraid to get on stage and say, this is what we're doing. This is what's possible, right? It's back to that idea of like moving ideas and people. It's like, hey, y'all, this is doable. And it's not always easy work. Sometimes, there's nervousness, there's uncertainty, even a little bit of fear in this current environment. We're really going to talk about race, money, and power. That's what we're
Mhm.
going to do. But it's also that recognition that, you know what, this is who we are and how we think about the work. And if we are willing to do this, it will support others in doing their own exploration and investigation of who they are, how they want to show up. And this invitation, let's be partners, let's do
Yeah.
this together. Because Cal Wellness alone is not going to transform California. But there are so many amazing organizations who, if we were willing to kind of put all of our resources together intellectually, our hearts and souls, our money, there's so much that we could be doing, and we are doing.
Yes. And it's in that true partnership, heart and action,
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
it together.
yeah.
Richard, to bring it to a close today, what's bringing you hope? How are you protecting your mental health?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned hope. Hope is a leadership value of mine, and
Mm,
it is rooted in the fact that I'm a pretty positive person by nature. And there have been times in my life where I've questioned whether that positivity is really welcome or helpful,
mhm.
especially when there are real problems, people are struggling,
Yeah.
and the work is hard.
Yep.
Sometimes, it feels like you're being a little bit Pollyanna.
Mm,
For me, the deeper value is not just being positive, but being hopeful. And to me, hope is about both seeing possibility, but also being willing to work toward practical solutions. Being hopeful means that there's something both positive and possible, but that you're willing to do that work because there's a better result on the other end. And so the things that give me hope are the people that I surround myself with. And I include my staff and my board at the California Wellness Foundation. This organization, in many ways, represents the state that
mm,
we are serving. And it's a community of folks who are willing to be bold and are willing to bring their whole selves into the work, bring all of that to the table. What gives me hope are the partners that, as you've described and reflected back in this conversation, who see what we're doing and are encouraging us to continue to be bold in the work that we do, and who are willing to be candid about places where we can do better or we can be an agent of change among our peers to do
mm.
better. And I appreciate that. It gives me hope that there's real honest dialogue, candid conversation that's going to make us all better. And for me personally, I have to tell you,
Tell
late in
me.
life, I moved from the stage into my body in a different way. Health and wellness for me means getting out for a run morning, and I'm in my mid 50s. So when my knees are cranky, I get in the pool and I swim.
I love.
Um, and it's not only about physical health, it's also, Seciah, about just as a human being, a single unit, recharging and reconnecting with myself, that run time, that swim time.
Yeah.
It's also some quiet time. I don't run with ear pods or anything. And when I'm in the pool, it's just me and my head and my thoughts. I'm not in a screen. I'm not engaging with someone else. And that I found, particularly in the last couple of years, to be so important. It's hard in our culture and the society to make that space for ourselves, but it's so important. So important.
So important. I love that you said swimming. I'm a swimmer as well. It's
Yeah.
the only thing that helps me just relax and be able to quiet down that work brain, right? That keeps us on 24/7. But that is the only, and maybe it's forced meditation because you have to breathe in a very
It
specific way to survive
absolutely.
there, right?
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that. I think it is a bit of forced meditation. I was raised in the church. And so one of the things I remember from early childhood is the idea of morning meditation,
Mm,
and sort of just quiet.
Yeah.
And as I've gotten into what I do think of my meditation practice when I'm running, when I'm swimming, I've been reminded of that quietness that I was sort of trained to accept and to incorporate into my life, a morning devotional.
Yeah.
And that I think is part of what keeps us rooted and grounded, connected to reality and not in headlines and frankly the demands and the needs of people around us, but also allows us to connect with what we need to be in the work. And yeah, I may need to ask you about swimming tips because
Okay,
I'm
we'll
relatively new
share.
to swimming. So, after the podcast.
We'll definitely share that. Yeah. No. Well, with that sentiment on staying centered and focused and healthy, thank you so much for joining us today for A Tu Salud. What a beautiful episode. And we hope you have a beautiful day.
Thank you, Seciah. Thank you. It's been fun.
So great. Thank you. Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.